Boker Tov, today's daf is daf Chof Dalet in Nizir. Michael pointed out that on yesterday's daf, I think that I mentioned when I said about Rechavam, who was from Naama. I mentioned that Naama was his wife. Naama was a wife of Shlomo, and Rechavam was their son. So he was the four generations after Moab. Moab came into the royal family with Oved, the father of Yishai, the father of David, the father of Shlomo, and the second daughter, who was from Ammon, the second daughter of Lod, who was Ammon, came in 4 generations later with the birth of Rechavam, who was from Naama, a wife of Shlomo. Says the Mishnah, a woman became a Nazir. We had before the Roman could be a Nazira. The Frishas Behemta, she set aside her 3 animals for a regular Naziris of Tara, which includes an Ola, Chatas, and Shlomen, 3 regular animals, not birds. The husband broke it. We've learned that the husband breaks her neder, not Mila Mafreya, not retroactively, but going forward. Im Shalo Haisabem. Now, the question is, what happens to the animals? Okay, so her Naziris is terminated at that point. No more Naziris. What do you do with the animals? If she set them aside, if the animals belong to him, then put them back in the flock, put them back in the barn. She had no right to sanctify his animals. They belong to him. Even as we'll see, if he gave her permission, it was only under the condition that she's going to need them for a Nazir. Otherwise, his condition is revoked. The condition is not fulfilled, and any kedusha she gave them would have been revoked retroactively because she didn't really need them. So we'll see who this goes like. So let's say the animals belong to her. How can they belong to her? We'll see that question in the Gemara too. If the animals belong to her, so that means she sanctified these animals. They already have kedusha. What do you do? Achatos tamus. The chatos you let die. Why? Because it's like one of the 5 chatos hamesos. This is a chatos like shemesu ba'aleh. And a chatos, if you set aside an animal, a chatos, you brought it, you have a carbon, you have to bring because you sinned, and then you die. What happens to the animal? You let it die. You starve it and you let it die. It's one of the 5 chatos animals that you let die. One of his chatos shemesu ba'aleh. And we said before Daf Hayomi base that if the Nazir doesn't need it anymore, because they're not completing the Nazir's period of 30 days, a minimum of 30 days, then the chatas, you let it die. Ola, tikravol, bring it as an ola. What's the problem? An ola can always be brought even as a goodwill offering. So it's an ola v'nazir, bring it the ola anyway. Okay, what about the shlamim? The shlamim, what do you do with the shlamim animal? Bring it as a shlamim. No problem bringing an ola and shlamim. See, a chatas or an asham, you don't bring if the person doesn't need it anymore. There's only 2 atonements. So for an asham, you let it get a balmum and then you sell it and bring its money, you bring an ola. But the chatas, it's halacha must be seen that you let it die. But an ola shlam you can always bring. So bring the shlam. However, it has the rules, part of the rules of a nazir, because we'll see that normally a regular shlam is eaten for 2 days and a night. That means if you brought it on Monday morning, you bring it Monday night, and you can eat it on Monday night, and Tuesday for a day, a night, and a day. That's a regular shlum, but there's other kinds of shlum, like a toda, which is only eaten for a day and a night, and the shlum of a nazir is also only eaten for a day and a night. So it's eaten for a day. When it says le'ol mecha means a day and a night. Vein tuna lechem. Now, normally a regular shlum of a nazir requires breads. Breads are brought with it, but you can't bring the breads here. Why? Because you need the nazir with it. Yes, the pasuk says that. Pasuk says, al kapei hanazir. You put the breads on the hands of the nazir. Well, there is no nazir anymore, and therefore, what can you do? Right? The pasuk says, "V'nasal al kapei nazir." Pasuk yates perak kavav pasuk yates in Bamidbar. V'nasal al kapei nazir achros ka'achros nazir. So it says here that you have to put it on the hands of the nazir. Well, there is no nazir, so you don't bring any breads with it. So that's what happens if she had her own karbanos. The chatas you let die. The ola you bring as an ola. The shlam you bring as an olam, as a shlam. You can only eat it for a day and a night, like it was sanctified as that of a nazir. It has that rule, but they don't bring the breads because there is no nazir anymore. Let's say she had some money. She hadn't actually designated these animals and given them this animal. Clyde is an ola, and you would have a gym is a chatos, and this one is a shlamim. You didn't actually designate the animals. She just set aside some money. Got $1,000 here. This will be for my animals, but she didn't say which money goes for which animal. So in a case like that, hayilamos stumen yiplon adava. We'll see. So even though there's money for chatos in there too, but you all give it as an adava. That's learned out of psukim or halacha mashmisina, as we'll talk about. So that all goes for an adava, right? And therefore, that's the rule. It's a pasuk. It's tomorrow's Gemara that it goes for an adava, meaning you bring it with it olos. Okay, you give it adava to the base. Usually they bring it for olos, like what they call kitzah mizbeach, when things are not a lot of work in the base of Mikdash. They bring carbon olos there to keep the business, to keep the shifts going. Let's say you set aside money and you said this money, this pile of money is for the chatas, this is for the olos, this is for the shlamim. So what do you do with the mechatas? The mechatas you can't use for anything else because it's already set aside for this. It has it's the sanctity of chatas. It's got to be destroyed. You give it, you throw it out, throw it down the toilet. That's all. If you put it in the yamamelch, means you destroy it where it won't be used. But it doesn't have the full kedusha of a regular chatas animal. Therefore, there's no me'ila. If you had enough from it, there's no me'ila. But the rabbanan lo nehen v'lo. And as when you have the phrase in Shas, lo nehen, you should have enough from it. But if you had enough from it, that means that there's no me'ila d'oraisa. In the rabbanan, you're not supposed to have enough from it. In other words, it's not a me'ila d'oraisa because it's not really a hektish animal, but it has the kedusha to it, kedusha of chatas. Therefore, you have to destroy it. Just like chatas animal is destroyed, you let it die. The same thing, the money you let it, you destroy the money. Demei ola. Let's say you have saying you set aside the money for a chatas on shlam. So the money of the chatas you destroy. The money for the ola you be ola umolimba. Now, if you bring it as an ola, as soon as you set it aside as an ola, it's kache kachim. You're mowing it right away. You can't have any enough from the animal. It has to go to the base of mikdash. It has to be brought as a carbon, and you can't have any enough from it. In fact, afterwards you can't have enough from it either. It's got to be totally burnt. Demei shlam. What do you do with demei shlamim? You bring it as a shlamim. Again, you eat it only for one day because it's that of the nazir. However, he doesn't say it over here, but the shlamim, Rashi says, it doesn't have to say mo because there is no me'ila on shlamim. Shlamim is kachim kalam. Kachim kalam, you're only moel in the emurim, in the fatty parts of the animal after zrikas adam. One of the differences we had in this vachim, right, between kachim, you're moeling right away. Can't have any enough from it. If it's an animal, if it's like a chatas or an asham or a carbon mincha that the kohanim eat, so they're entitled to it. It's their food after zrikas adam and aktaras emurim, then they're entitled to eat it. But you're mowing right away. Kachim kalam, like a shlamim, right? Or other kachim kalam, like here, the of the nazir also. This is a shlamim or toda, kachim kalam, things like that. You're only mowing in the emurim, in the fatty parts, after zrikas adam, but you're not mowing the animal before zrikas adam at all. Mantana, who's the author of our Mishnah, the Ba'alo Mishtabim? What do we say in our Mishnah? He said in the Mishnah that if she set aside animals, but they weren't hers, they belonged to the husband. So they put them back in the flock. If he terminated her naziris by breaking her neder, so put it back in the flock. Now, what do you mean? Isn't he obligated to give her karbanos? If she needs karbanos, you got to bring karbanos. Isn't that the rule? So therefore, they should be kadosh already. Why do you say that he only gave them to her provisionally if she's going to need them? Mantana de Ba'alo Mishtabim. Who is the author? Who is the Tana who holds that a husband's not obligated to provide for his wife karbanos? Rav Chisda Rabbanan. It goes like the Rabbanan as a machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rabbanan. It goes like Rabbanan. Why? The Rabbanan say you're not obligated. This also Rav Yehuda goes. If you say so, Rav Yehuda argues with the Rabbanan. Amai takes it with Rabbanan. Why do you say you put these animals back in the flock if they belong to the husband? Hamishtabila. He's obligated to give them to her. He's obligated to provide her with the animals. The time Rav Yehuda Omer. Other maybe carbon asher alishto. Let's say a wife was poor. A woman was poor, and she had a chiyuv to bring a carbon. She made let's say swore falsely, or she made some reason why she have to bring a carbon. But let's say it's a carbon olaviore, where it depends on how wealthy you are. If you're rich, you bring an animal. If you're poor, you bring birds, a couple of birds. If you're very poor, you bring a flower offering, a carbon mincha. Let's say she's poor, and now he marries her. The Yehuda says he has to provide her with a full animal. even when she was poor, she didn't have to. She didn't bring it, and she got married to him. His obligation is, if he's wealthy, he has to provide her with the proper animals as if she's wealthy. That goes with the Mr. and Mrs. Mrs. is now, she's entitled to his wealth too for that. All animals that she's chayta, shekach kasav la. This is what he writes to her in the ksuba. In the ksuba, it's written, kol achrayas the islach alai. Any achrayas that you have is on me. Min kermasnach. Even the islach alai, it's now on me. I'm obligated. Min kermasnach from before. Any achrayas that you have on yourself from before the islach alai min kermasnach. Even from before now, I'm responsible to give it to you. Interesting that. In other words, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's mechuyev to give her the carbon. So if he's mechuyev to give her the carbon and she set aside the carbon, then if he breaks her naziris, the carbon should still be kadosh, and like the rules should apply to chatas, ol, and shlavim. You don't say you put him back in the flock. So the chara goes like the Rabban who say that he's not obligated, not like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi says no. Afilu tamer Rabbi Yehuda. You can even go like Rabbi Yehuda. When is he obligated to give her milsa tzricha, something that she needs? Milsa tzricha lo. In other words, if she doesn't need it, he's not obligated. So when he says, yeah, if you're a nazir, okay, you're obligated. I'm obligated to take for my animals. But he broke the naziris. It's only he's only obligated if she needs them. If she doesn't need them now, so his obligation is taken away. Before he broke the neder, she set them aside, right? But it's provisional. In other words, this that he's obligated to give it to her was only the provision that she's going to need them. She's not going to need them, so it's retroactively rescinded. His obligation that her ability to take her karbanos is rescinded even retroactively because it's only on the condition that you're entitled to it. It's like hekdesh batos. If you made a mistake, it's not hekdesh. So here too, it's only on the condition you're going to need them. If you're not going to need them, you don't have permission to take them at all. Here is an interesting thing. We said that he writes her in the ksuba that al achrayas that you have, this is a lie, min kamanasna, even before you got married, certainly from the time that they got married is obligated. Tosfos in the third from the bottom, Tosfos the third from the bottom, about 7 lines from the bottom of the page says, Hachigaras Rashi. He brings down Rashi. Now here again, most of the Mefarshim say that this is not Rashi. Like we had in the Dharm. In the Dharm, it says Rashi, and it's not Rashi, right? So we know that it's not Rashi. Here, a lot of Mefarshim also say they call this the Mefarish, the explainer. In the place of Rashi, it's Rashi. It could be that they're right, and here's an indication that they're right because Rashi he brings down that Rashi says not that he writes her in the ksuba, but when they get divorced, she writes to him that I mochel you all the achrayas that I have on you, achrayas that I have on you, the isli Allah, right? That I have on you, mikadam stuff from before, meaning you're obligated to pay for my karbanos. Well, now when he gives her a divorce, she writes him a receipt and says, okay, I'm mochel that. I'm reading Tosas now, 6 lines from the bottom page. After you pay the ksuba, so she writes him a receipt. I've received the ksuba, it's kavalti, ksubasi. The kolach rice, the isleach, any rice that I have on you, enough from before. So he says that it's the same. It's effectively the same thing. That he writes her in the ksuba that I'm responsible for everything, even before we got married, and when they get divorced, he pays her the ksuba. She gives him a receipt, and in the ksuba she writes a receipt, and I mochel any obligation that we have from before also. This is the ksuba. So, but the way that he writes Hachigaras Rashi, and we don't have that in our Rashi over here. We have the way Rashi reads the way we have in our Gemara that he writes her in the ksuba. It's mashma that this is not Rashi, right? Because Rashi says that the way we have in the Gemara, and Tosfos brings down that Rashi says this. So it sounds like that those people who the Mefarshim who say that Rashi in our Gemara and Nizir is not really Rashi, it's only a Mefarish. It's not really Rashi. I call Rashi. It's certainly a Rishon in any case. All right, so back in the Gemara. So we said that our Mishnah goes like Rabbanan, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, since he's obligated to provide her, all her kabbalah should also be kadosh. The Gemara says, no, not necessarily so. Even according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's only obligated to provide her if she's going to need him. If she's not going to need him, she doesn't have to. Economy, some say, back in the Gemara now, 6 lines from the bottom page of the Gemara, Economy, Mantan, Rabbi Yehuda. Some say, no. The author of Mishnah is Daf Rabbi Yehuda, who says that he's normally obligated to provide for her kabbalah. So When is he obligated? But milsa the sricha is something she needs. Milsa sricha low. He's not obligated. In other words, like we gave an answer in the first way that it could even go like a He says, no, dafka does go like a Buddha, who says he's obligated, but he's only obligated when she needs it. If she doesn't need it, the obligation is rescinded. The Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, says he's never obligated. So lo mishaba l'klal. He's never mishaba to her. So what's the idea that it doesn't work? It doesn't work at all. In fact, the only way it would work, according to Rabban, he's not obligated to provide for her animals. You're on your own. You get it. Go raise your money somewhere else, and even then it belongs to me because Komash and Shekhanabala will see. So he's not obligated for karbanos at all. So certainly she can't use his karbanos. Ella hechidami. How is it possible that she gets animals from his flock? The Mishabala could go into Akila. He says, okay, I'll give you the animals. I'll give you the animals. Well, if he gave her the animals, period, give her the Akila, I'm sure they're hers, and then you should say that if they're hers, the same thing that we said in the Mishnah. If they're his, they go back in the flock. If they're hers, they maintain the Kedusha. The Chatos you let die, the Olam Shlamim you bring as Olam Shlamim. Well, if he gave them to her, then they're hers, right? So what's the problem? So it can't go like Rabbanan, because according to Rabbanan, he's not obligated to give it to her. And if he does give them to her, then the rules should apply in the Mishnah. If they're hers, the Chatos should let die, and the Olam Shlamim you bring as a carpet. So when our Mishnah says that if they're his karbanos, they go back in the flock, cannot apparently go like Rabbanan at all. But Rabba says, no, we could have an answer there too. It could even go like Rabbanan. Rabba Mafil Ten Rabbanan. He maknil, again, when he gives them to her, he also gives them to her with that stipulation, maknil nami b'milsa tzricha, only if she's going to need them. So you could really say that our Mishnah goes like the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda argue about whether a man has an obligation to give his wife, to provide his wife with karbanos according to his standard of living. Like if he's wealthy and she's poor, or even if she didn't have any obligation before, but now she gets an obligation, he has to provide her according to his means. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Shita. The Rabbanan say no, he doesn't have to provide her according to his means. He's not responsible for that. But the Mishnah can go like either way, because either like the Rabbanan and the Mishnah says that they go back in the flock means where he gave them to her with the contingency, if you're not going to need them, they're buying again. Or even like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda also says he's only obligated with as long as she's going to need them. If she's not going to need them, he's not obligated. So the Mishnah go either way. So the Mishnah says, back to the basic question. If the animals belong to her, and now she's no longer a Nazir, what do you do with the animals? They're already kadosh. Chatos ol shlom. They have the kedusha. What do you do? So you bring them. The chatos you let die, and the ol shlom you bring as karbanos. The Gemara says, he manala. How is she going to have? How does she own anything? Hamar, we have a klal. Mashikan seisha kanabala. Whatever a woman owns belongs to her husband. So what do you mean she owns them? She doesn't own them; belong to the husband anyway. So how can she own anything? Amar Papa says, she scraped them off her dough, meaning she saved them from her allowance. She gets a weekly allowance, how much to spend. Let's say her husband was out of town and she provided an apotropos to give her a certain amount of money. And she was mistapik mamuat, she used less, and she stuck some aside. Many women like to do that. The husband gives them a certain amount of money, and they like to hide a little bit of money in the cookie jar, for a rainy day, so something that the husband doesn't know about. That you could do it that way. Or you could say, maybe that doesn't work either, because if she sets aside money, scrapes some, saves off a little bit from her allowance, it still belongs to the husband. If she used it, but otherwise it still belongs to the husband. So by saying somebody else gave her the money, but that works. If somebody else gave, let's say a great uncle of hers said, I don't want that scoundrel of a husband touching this money. I'll give you a gift, but it's in a separate account and your husband can't touch it. In other words, I'm only giving to the condition that her husband has no rishus over it. So with that money, she brought the karbanos. That's how it's possible that she brought karbanos. So the Mishnah says, if she used his money for the karbanos, according to the Rabbanan that he gave her, according to Rabbi Yehuda that he's obligated to give her, fine. If he gave it to her, he's obligated to give it to her. If she needed him, fine, then she brings his karbanos. But if she doesn't need it because the Nazirus was terminated by the husband, then they go back into the husband's flock because he never meant to give it to her. He only gave it to her the condition that she's going to need it. The condition wasn't fulfilled. But if they were her karbanos, she got them. She had money on her own that her uncle gave her, or somebody gave her this money on the condition that the husband has no rishus over it. She brought the karbanos, then the rules apply. The chatas is holy, and you have to let it die, and the olam shlam you bring as prescribed in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, "Ola tikrav, ola v'ashlam tikrav." Amalei Shmuel la'avu bar'i. So when we said the chatas, the chatas is a chatas of a yachid is usually a kispa, a female lamb under a year old, and the ola is always a male lamb, right? A male lamb, and the asham. This not the case, not an asham over here, but chatas ola and the shlamim. Shlamim could be either one, but it's shlamim could be either male or female. But it has different rules over here than other kinds of shlam. As we said, normally shlam are eaten for 2 days and a night. You don't require breads with them. And here the mitzvah is that the shlam has to be 2 years old. Different rules about the shlam of a nazir. So he said in the Mishnah that this shlamim is not a normal shlamim, right? The ola is an ola, it's a burnt offering. The chatas is a chatas, brought. The shlamim is different. It's not eaten for 2 days and a night. It got breads with it, different rules. So Shmuel said to Avua bar Ihi, Amalei Shmuel bar Ihi, don't sit down, Adam Risli, till you explain to me this thing. Adam Milsa, I've heard the following thing, Eluhain. I've heard this Milsa, I've heard this thing. What did I hear? Eluhain Arba Elam, these are the 4 rams, right? This is what the shlam here is. The shlamim is a kind of a ram. They bring that as a ram, right? Which is a male adult sheep. She'enan te'unan lechem. There are 4 Nazir shlamim that don't require any lechem. I said before, if you're not a Nazir, if she's not a Nazir at the time she brings the kabbalas, you can't bring the lechem because it says in the pasuk about the lechem, you put it on the hands of the Nazir. There's no Nazir anymore. She's not a Nazir. So you can't do the lechem. But there's 4 kinds like that. What are the 4? Shalo, if it's his carbon. Shalah, her carbon. Shalah Misa, after they die. As we'll see the case, let's say the Nazir set aside karbanos, he was a Nazir and he died. What do you do with them? Okay, Shlach Misa. Shlach Kapara, after Kapara. What does it mean after Kapara? Kapara means they already got atoned with another carbon. For example, let's say a Nazir, he have this Nazir set aside his karbanos, Chatzol and Shlamim, and the animals ran away. You want to keep them and they ran away. You lost them. He got 3 other karbanos. Now they found the original karbanos. What do you do with them? Chatas shekipur baleh, you let it die, right? Shlamim, you bring it as a shlam. The ola you bring as the ola, shlamim. But the shlam also no bread. So there's 4 kinds of shlamim animals, these kinds of rams that you bring that have no bread. One is if it's his. What's the case of his? Why wouldn't he bring bread? We'll see. His, hers, after death and after kapara. Okay, but what are they? Explain this to me, he said. Number 1, number 2, shalo, number 3, shalach hamisa, shalach kapara. What are they? Shalah haramar, hers we just explained. If she became a Nazira and she set aside her kabbalah, she had her own money, she set aside her kabbalah, and then he canceled the Naziris. So what do you do with the animals? We said the chatas you let die, the old you bring as an old, the shlam you bring as a shlam, but no bread, right? Gluten-free, a gluten-free sacrifice, right? Shalo, what's the case of his? Why would his Naziris not require bread with the shlam? That's not. We're going to have in Mishnah soon. Special halacha in the Torah that a man, not a woman, a man can make his son, his young son, a little boy, he's got a boy 8 years old, wants to train him or whatever reason, he can make him a Nazir, unless the kid objects. If the kid doesn't object, he's a Nazir. Can't drink wine, can't tell him a mace, has to let his hair grow. Made him a Nazir. Ha'ish madras b'no b'nazir, v'einisha madras b'no. So Allah Moshe Sinai, that a man can make his son a Nazir. Not once he's bar mitzvah. Once he's bar mitzvah, he's his own person, but he's a katan. He can tell him, I should be a Nazir. I'm making my son a Nazir. Nazir, okay. Ketzad as a Nazir. V'einisha madras b'no Nazir. Ketzad. You put in the word ketzad in Mishnah. Gilach, let's say he shaved his head, meaning he objected. He says, I don't want to be a Nazir. I want a haircut. Or other relatives shaved him. Or or he objected. Or others says, no, he's an 8-year-old kid. What are you driving him crazy for? People objected. Okay, that's the rule. He's a Nazir unless somebody objects or unless he objects. Okay, okay. Let's say though, the father set aside money for the kid already, right? For the karbanos. The kid, I'm not a Nazir, here's the money for the karbanos. He didn't yet specify which is chatzal. He just said, here's $1,000 for the 3 karbanos. And for the 3 karbanos, he didn't specify. And even if he didn't, Rashi is going to say later on, even if he didn't say specifically that they're stumin, he just said, he just said, here's the money for the karbanos. He didn't say anything more than that. So what do? So we said before, just like we said in the mission, what do you do? Hayomos stumin. Yiplu Nadava. It all goes for Nadava for the base meters because the money's holy. Holy money is set aside for Kabbanis, it's holy money. Masma for Russian, if he set aside money and he said, this money's for the Chatas, this is for the Shlom, this is for the Ola, what do you do? So again, like we learned before, the Mei Chatas, the money for the Chatas, you destroy, you throw it into the Dead Sea. The Mei Ola, you be Ola. Umolim ben is Mila, because Mila is on an Ola, immediately it's Kachim. The Mei Shlom, you be Shlamim. Only eaten for one day like that of a Nazir. Vein tun and lechem, and doesn't require bread, right? Doesn't require bread. So there's your example of shalom. It's his, right? The father or the son set aside these korbanos. The father set aside for the son, and then the son effectively broke the netter. He has the ability to do that because he can object by either shaving or just saying, "I don't want to be a Nazir." So we have the wife. How did you have the case of the wife? Where the husband canceled it. He broke her Naziris. You have a case with the son, that's Shalom. Okay. What's the case of Shalach Misa? Manon, what about that case? Tanya, we learn a Mafresh Moshe is also man's a Nazir and set aside, it's a Tanan really, the Tanan and Mafresh Mishnah and Menachos. A Mafresh Moshe is also man set aside money for his Naziris, for the Karbanos. So what do? Mafresh Moshe Naziris, Lon Hen Below Mol and Ben. As long as he just set aside money, the money itself, there's no me'ila yet. Why? You can't have enough from it because it's money set aside for kashim. But some of that money is going to go for shlomim. So any money that you look at might be shlomim money. And in shlomim money, there's no me'ila. So you wouldn't bring a carbon misafik, okay, a carbon me'ila for committed sacrilege with holy stuff, with holy objects. This money is holy, but some of the money is shlomim. There's no me'ila and shlomim, and only in the imurim after zrikas dam, as we said, kishlomim kachim kalim. Okay, let's say mace v'ha'ilam muscle. Let's say the guy died, and the money was still undetermined money, indeterminate money. As it wasn't decided which part of the money will go for which carbon. Yiflo nadava, as we said before, most of it goes for nadava, for the base of mikdash. Most of Russian. The man died and he left over this envelope of cash is for the ola. This is for the chatas. This is for the shlam. What do? Most of Russian. The mechatas, you got to destroy the money, as we said. Lo nehen below molen, because it's not really hegdish like an animal that there's meila on, but it's holy money, and therefore doesn't have a rule of meila. It's not an animal. However, it's not like a chatas animal, but you can't have an at least a rabbanan, and you have to destroy the money. You would, even though this is not a question, but this is definitely ola money. There's an extra difference if it's ola money or ola animal. There is meila there. But the mechatas, since the money is effectively supposed to be destroyed, there's no me'ila on it because it has this rule as if it's destroyed already. Maybe that's why there's no me'ila there. But an ola money or ola animal, either way, you're molding it immediately. Shlamim, you bring the shlamim. B'nechal yom echad, doesn't need lechem. Here's another example, and as we said before, the shlam anyway, you wouldn't be moel on until after Zrikas Dam. So there's your third example. We have Shalah, his and hers. We first said hers, our Mishnah. Shalah is the case of the son. Now we have the case of Lacher Misa. The guy died and he set aside money. This is Chatas money, Ola money, Shlam money. So that's what you do with the Shlamim money. You bring it as a Shlamim, no bread. You can't put it on his hands. He's dead, right? You can't put the bread on his hands. Shalacher Kapara. Now Shalacher Kapara is obviously if you brought another animal already, right? Like as we said. You set aside your animals, they ran off, they got lost or stolen, and then you found them later on after you brought other kabbanas in their stead. So they're also, the same thing was applied. Why? Shalach kapara, it's a svara. It's a svara. Shalach misa matam. What's the reason shalach misa, you don't bring bread? Kapara. He's not fit for atoning now because the guy's dead now. So all these rules don't apply. The regular rules of bringing kabbalah don't apply. Shalach kapara nami lo chazil kapara. After kapara, he's also not roy for kapara, so there's no reason to bring it. True, in the case where he's dead, there's no hands to put it on. But here he doesn't need a kapara. You don't bring a chatas ol shlamim for a person who already had a kapara. So if it's after kapara, the same rules apply. The ola, if it's an ola, it's an ola. If it's a chatas, you let it die. Either you let it die if it's an animal. If it's money, you destroy the money in the Yam HaMelech. And as a shlamim, it's set aside as a shlamim already, so bring it as a shlamim, but no bread, and it's only one day. Says Gemara Basulek, are there no other cases of a Nazir whose shlamim is brought without bread? V'ika we had before, we have Ika, the Tani Levi is the Girsa. The Tani Levi, that's the Girsa here. the Tony Levi learned. V'shar kol shalmin, or other kinds of shalmin is a sheshachtan shalom nisvasim. Let's say you shechted it improperly. Let's say with a bad kavana, not necessarily a bigger, but a bad kavana. Ksherim, they're kosher. As we said, beginning is vachim, right? Let's say you shefted it for a different person, not for this nazir, for somebody else. So it's like in the world it's kosher. So they're also been they only eat for one day because it is a nazir shlamim. You don't bring the bread with it. You don't bring the zroa, the b'shela with the, you don't cook the zroa etc. with it. So you see, there's a fifth example of a nazir's shlamim that comes without bread. If let's say you made a mistake, you brought a shlok mitzvasan, or the mitzvasan, he says it's in Rashi here, he says the mitzvasan is to bring it a 2-year-old one. Let's say you brought a 1-year-old one, so they had the kedusha of shlamim, but you didn't bring it properly. So it's kosher, the animal's kosher, you can eat it, but he's not yosei with it, and it's eaten only for one day, it doesn't need lechem. So there's the fifth case too. The answer is mitzvasan kachashav, shalom mitzvasan like kosher. We're only including the ones that are brought properly, did it like the mitzvah, meaning there was nothing improperly done. In the case of hers, so his Naziris was canceled. In the case of his, the kid canceled Naziris. In the case guy died, he died. In the case of he already had a kapar, nothing was done wrong. Those were just the circumstances. In this case, where something was done wrong, let's say you bought it with a kavanah of shalol lishma, you bought it with a bad kavanah, or you brought the animal at the wrong stage in its life, the wrong age. So there it wasn't done, the mitzvah wasn't done properly. Shalom mitzvah, we're not including those. But if you included those, there is taka more than 4. All right, we'll pick them here tomorrow for Shem Pahilam Mostum and Yiplin and Daba. Yeah. So first of all, on Pesach, when we talk about over here, the bread, we don't mean chametz bread. We mean bread like that are matzah, right? So. Even 12 loaves of bread on the shulchan in the basement, you should also matzah bread. Those aren't things. There's only two kinds that are chametz. One is that with a toda, right, of a toda, and one more. In other words, most of the times when we talk about a korban mincha flour offering, when we talk about bread, we mean matzah bread. In fact, we say that in korbanos that you can't let it become chametz. In other words, almost all of them have no chametz involved. It's only there's only 2 korbanos that involve chametz. All the other korban minchas are like matzah, not chametz. All right, we'll pick them here tomorrow, Mr. Have a good day.